It's about 10 o'clock here, time to get started with our engineering webinar. I want to welcome everybody. This is our second engineering webinar that we have conducted here. We did one last month and it was really a great success. So we thought we would try it again here in July and continue right along. So you can mark your calendar that the third Tuesday of every month at 10 a.m. Central Time, we'll actually have one of these engineering webinars. We have a couple of really nice guests on with us. And I think he's already clicked on here. I see Wayne. Wayne Precita is with us. Wayne is the president of the Society of Broadcast Engineers, and he also works with Texas A&M. The University of Texas A&M, where he's the director of IT and broadcast, over 45 years over there, and he's been with us here in Birmingham at the Engineering Academy several times. So I asked Wayne if he would be with us today and share some information about the SBE, the advantages of being a member of the SBE, and then because of his vast knowledge and experience in the IT world, we wanted to also get him to talk about IT security. So Wayne, I'm going to turn the program over to you, and just I will tell people that if they have any questions they want to ask Wayne or any of our participants, you can open up the chat window. It'll either be at the bottom or at the top of your screen, and you can click on that and type in a question, and they can answer you back. So Wayne, I'll turn it over to you now.
All right, thank you, Larry. Good morning to everyone, and thank you for an opportunity to talk with you about the Society of Broadcast Engineers, as well as some cybersecurity, I guess, thoughts coming up here shortly. Well, first of all, I will assume most of you are familiar with the SBE. But for those that are not, it is really the only professional society that is devoted to broadcast engineering and media technology professionals. It encompasses a wide range of roles from engineers to operators to technicians, currently about 5,000 plus members strong. And there's a wide variety of services that are provided to the members as well as the industry. And I'll talk about just a couple of those services in just a moment. Often I'm asked, well, what is the SBE up to? Well, from a leadership standpoint, we have a lot of projects going on that are really kind of behind the scenes, so to speak. And let's see, get my slides to change here. There we go. Several of the projects that are underway, again, these are kind of some of the behind the scenes stuff. We are in the process of a executive director search based upon John Perret's announcement of his retirement at the end of the year. That process is well underway, and in fact, we are about to begin the initial first rounds of interviews with our candidates. We also have the ATSC3 certification that is under development. That certification has now gone through 2 rounds of beta testing and is coming together. Maybe not as quick as everyone would like, but it is making progress and will be available soon. Also, I've been working on website enhancements and social media enhancement or integration. And then, of course, continued government advocacy. As everyone is aware, we seem to be continually addressing challenges, particularly from the FCC with Spectrum and so forth. One of the, I think, strong aspects of the SBE is the professional development and continuing education offerings that are available, ranging from SBE University courses to certainly the webinars, NS workshops at various venues ranging from NAB to regional, and of course the leadership development course. Certification is another one of those key programs that is offered. And there's several, purposes of the certification. But one of the main reasons are, I think, benefits is to raise the status of broadcast engineers and recognize achievement of a professional competence level, and also to maintain that certification requires ongoing continuing education. Certainly there's some eligibility requirements. As I mentioned, there is continuing education required to renew that certification. And with that, we have a certification committee that administers that program and likewise develops the new certifications such as the ATSC 3 that I had mentioned. Again, a fairly exhaustive list of certification levels, beginning at what might be considered entry-level positions to the professional level and even specialty certifications with that as well. And with most of our certification offerings, there is a certification preview available, which is basically practice tests to give you an idea for the field. Not the actual questions, but similar questions as well. And another little tidbit about certification from our most recent salary or compensation survey that is done, you can see that those holding SBE certifications tend to earn more in the workplace. And another little graphic that maybe better illustrates kind of the hierarchy and the process to achieve different certifications, particularly those of the more professional certifications that have experience requirements with them as well. The local chapter is one of the real strengths of the organization that brings that localism to the organization. Currently, there's 115 local chapters throughout the U.S., as well as a few international chapters that come into play. Each of those chapters, of course, maintains their own meeting schedules for local events. And of course, with our recent challenges with the coronavirus, Zoom has become a very popular meeting format or a way to have those meetings. In fact, I have enjoyed being able to attend many chapter meetings around the country by the use of Zoom. And of course, also the Web Extra that has been with us now for actually quite a while. That is a monthly meeting on the web that was really developed to bring a chapter to those that really were not located in a geographic area where there was a convenient local chapter. And I'll talk more about that in just a moment. So if you're not a member, I'd like to ask you to consider membership. It's pretty easy to do. There's many different membership levels depending upon your, I guess, position, so to speak. There are some qualifications for the different levels, and also the Member Plus, which is really a membership option that gives you free access to all of the SBE webinars. Currently, there is well over 90 individual webinars that are available to you in an on-demand library, as well as any of the new webinars that are developed and come about through your membership period. With looking ahead for the next couple of months, I would like to call your attention to some of those webinars. There's one, in fact, this Thursday, dealing with the C-band, the new environment with the changes that are happening in the C-band. This is a free webinar, by the way, in case you're not a member or in case you do not hold the Member Plus option. This is one of a couple of webinars we try to do each year that is free that generally deals with some type of regulatory or advocacy seal. So that's coming up this Thursday. Also next Monday is the monthly meeting of the Web Extra chapter of the Web, which will feature Rodney Vanderveer, who leads the SBE Leadership Development course that is normally held each year. That was scheduled for this August in Atlanta, and that is now being postponed into the spring once again due to the impact of the coronavirus. And then finally, in, I guess mid-August, we have Module 6 of our Audio over IP webinar series continues with a focus on AES 67. And also, I must mention the SBE 2020 elections are currently underway. If you remember, you should have received a ballot by email or mail, and I do encourage you to vote in that election, which of course ends later in August. We have currently 6 open board seats, and there's 9 candidates for those. So your vote is very important. So with that, Larry, that is my quick spiel on the SBE. How about we move on to talk about some cybersecurity topics for the remainder of my time here?
Yeah, I think that'll work good. I was going to tell you that on the poll, those of you who didn't see the poll, around 60% of those, 59 to 60% that are actually on this Zoom call are members of the SBE. And of those, 44 of them, 44% are actually hold a certification. So I think that's some pretty good numbers.
Yes, it is. And those that are members, thank you very much for the support of your organization or your association. And those that are not members, I hope maybe that today you learned about one of the service offerings that might be of benefit to you and will consider membership. Well, let's talk about cybersecurity a little bit. And it's certainly no secret, I think, to anyone here that our broadcast or our media plant has changed. This, what I often describe as this traditional rack room environment, has gone through some changes. We've transitioned, are in the process of transitioning, or maybe you already have, or even planning. Likely that transition is moving from a baseband analog based plant, whether it's audio or video, to an IP based plant. With that, certainly comes a lot of features and advantages. Often those are found in some of the cloud-based services that can be integrated as well. And of course, that brings this whole new, I guess, vocabulary of service-based architectures, from infrastructure as a service to service architectures, in other words, infrastructure available to us. So this traditional rack room looks like a data center now. Well, in reality, it is a data center. And with that, however, often comes some negative areas that are not thought of, and that has to do with cybersecurity. And with that, of course, has brought some new level of service architectures is cybercrime as a service. So no longer do you necessarily need to possess that technical skill and the infrastructure to, let's say, inflict that harm upon someone. It can be simply purchased as a service. So why are we concerned about it? Well, there's no shortage of incidents of broadcast stations being involved in some type of cybersecurity incident around the country. These have been going on for some time, and they continue today. A lot of them, you read about them in the usual trade publications, but probably more alarming is the ones that you do not hear about. Often are some of the smaller stations that quite honestly can be totally devastating to them as well. So again, this is something we have to be aware of. Even the FCC has gotten our, I guess, notice that there is a potential problem, and they have issued some of their advisories, particularly dealing with emergency alert system equipment. And again, particularly note some of the smaller rural stations are often at risk, and offer some guidance as maybe what to do about those. So what are the cyber threats that are out there? Well, the list is fairly long, and we really don't have time to go through these in details, but other than just keep up that awareness. Particularly ransomware has been one of the particularly growing areas that continues to grow. The forms of malware, they're all still around there. A lot of these are focused specifically at the network infrastructure, ranging from some type of spoofing to some type of even application layer attacks, or the distributed denial of service attacks. And the little graphic shows you some of the current I guess, threats that are out there, and of course a URL for a little bit more information there. If we look at kind of cybersecurity attacks overall, they tend to fall into a pattern, or often described as a model. In fact, a fairly formal model is one referred to as the cyber kill chain, and there's a URL that will provide you a lot more additional reading and information regarding that chain of events. I think it can be simplified really into about 4 steps that generally occur, with the first one being the probing or the reconnaissance of network resources. In other words, looking or seeking a potential host that can be compromised. And one of our first things to do is to try to stop that process at that point. If so, we've avoided a lot of other grief if we can simply stop things at that initial step. Certainly, what is our risk is this vulnerability that is a system or maybe a host-specific weakness where there's then a compromise that is possible. And of course, the exploit is the actual code which would take advantage of that vulnerability. If we look at a broad spectrum of, I guess I'll call it IT security principles, theoretical principles, there's several of those that are involved. Certainly, you can spend a lot of resources, both time as well as money, in cybersecurity precautions. And all of these potential ways to spend money are all centered around really these probably 5 principles that I want to at least briefly mention. The first is the CIA triad, which by the way has nothing to do with a particular governmental agency with the same acronym. The CIA triad is really the focus of all of IT security on maintaining confidentiality, integrity, and availability. In the same sense, if you are seeking to do harm to an IT infrastructure in some ways, these are also the areas that you might seek to attack, so to speak, with the idea of finding out some type of confidential information or altering information to disrupt the integrity or disrupt the infrastructure through the availability. Another primary principle is that of defense in depth, which simply, oops, excuse me there, let me go back here. I hit the button too many times. Uh, Defense in depth is where you do not rely on one form of protection. In other words, you create multiple layers or levels of protection within your IT systems. Another principle, of course, is that of least privilege. In other words, minimizing access to resources. Um, and then also utilizing a risk-based analysis. In other words, focus up on the high likelihood, high risk aspects first. And then all of the security principles are based upon a exhaustive set of practices from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So what do we do to actually implement these things? Well, generally we want to minimize our attack areas. We want to adopt a separation of duties, particularly in the design of the network. We want to look for that weakest link analysis, very similar to how we might conduct some of our preventive maintenance areas in our broadcast environment. Look for that weakest link that is likely to failure and prepare for that. We want to simply identify single points of takeover. Again, a very similar way we might identify single points of failure in our infrastructure and utilize those steps to implement. When we talk about a secure network, well, what does that really mean? Well, there are many attributes that define a secure network. One is it begins with a security policy. And it's kind of ironic that a security policy is the first place to start, but this really is the key to having the rules that we're going to implement by. With that security policy also comes an accurate inventory of what are my IT or my network resources, because often we have things in our infrastructure that we may not even be aware of, but that inventory is really a key aspect. We certainly want to comply with the CIA triad. Remember, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. We want to utilize this defense in depth. In other words, a layered design approach to separation and segmentation of resources. We want to limit privileges, very similar to what might be described as the top secret need to know type classification. We want to basically have a need to access. And certainly this applies to users, but also it needs to apply to resources, because often we focus upon limiting the privileges of a user, but let applications have wide open access to those resources. So we need to focus on both users as well as application and develop a mindset of denying by default. Certainly, we want to control that access using various technologies that are available to us as well. And then finally, have an active support program in terms of monitoring. In other words, know what is normal. Keep up with the housekeeping within our IT infrastructure. And all of these factors allows us to create that secure network environment. The defense in depth approach is one that I think is often overlooked and in some ways can be fairly simple to implement. It's also sometimes referred to as the castle approach, with the idea of using the architecture of the design of a castle. Once again, you do not rely on an individual protection mechanism. You have multiple protection mechanism. So if one is breached, there is another obstacle that is being faced. Often this is done through network segmentation by establishing security zones or security levels, leading from a less secure to the most secure environment. In a broadcast environment, we might segment our different security zones associated with the functional operation of our broadcast facility. Now, on the surface, you look at a diagram like this and say, gosh, that's certainly a lot of network equipment to have to implement. If we look at one particular layer or zone consisting of a firewall or a packet filter, a layer 3 router, a layer 2 Ethernet switch, in reality, all of this infrastructure can be implemented in a single device, namely a layer 3 switch, and really can be, depending upon the size of that network and the port density needed, that may just be one piece of network hardware to implement this segmented architecture. You also might see this concept referred to as the onion network, with the idea of, think about the layers of the onion. The outer layers are less secure. As you move toward the center, it is a more secure environment. So how do you go about implementing? Well, one place I might suggest is utilize the OSI model, often thought of to be somewhat of a legacy model, but I think it certainly has a lot of place today because it provides the vocabulary of networking still, and it provides this structured framework that we simply begin with the physical layer. In other words, we secure the physical assets of the infrastructure, and then we move up the stack, so to speak. To layer 2, we focus on utilizing capabilities within a managed Ethernet switch. Moving up to layer 3, we implement packet filtering. Packet filtering is done either through an access control list and or a firewall. In most applications, we might do both of those. And then finally, at layer 4 and above, we're going to do encryption and authentication. And then finally, one of the aspects is to do not overlook is some type of testing. I have spent a lot of time, maybe that's money, maybe that's time, most likely it's both, to put security practices in place. But how do I know that they are really working? Well, penetration test is the key. And I view that is the proof of performance of your cybersecurity systems. It is often, or it is always, a component of a security office audit, but its real purpose is to identify system weaknesses. And to do a penetration testing, typically we're going to use the same tools that a hacker might use to do that. The scope of that can be somewhat focused on applications. It might be host focused. It might even be physical intrusion focused, or a comprehensive audit is going to focus upon all of those areas. And once again, a structured flow of that process. A fairly lengthy URL that will give you a lot more study and reading on penetration testing. So if nothing else, this is my list of 10 things to do. If nothing else, the first 5. Change default logins. I cannot emphasize this enough. It is incredible how much equipment that exists out there with default login information. Of course, when we do change those default login, we want to use strong passwords. Paraphrases is generally the recommended way in which to do that. And again, cannot overemphasize that enough. This is the top 10 most popular passwords that exist out there. These lists are readily available. In fact, this is just the top 10 out of a list of about 500. And from an automated standpoint of someone attempting to penetrate an infrastructure, it's really not that big of a programming chore to use these libraries. We want to separate administrative and user accounts, particularly in a Windows environment. Again, segment your network. VLANs are a common way in which to do that. And then use packet filtering, whether it's an access control list or the firewall or a combination to control access. And again, on down the list and on and on. And finally, the very last one, don't overlook social engineering. This is one that's been around for a long time. It continues to be extremely effective. And this is really where you have to educate your users. A lot of ransomware events are triggered by a user clicking on a URL or a link in an email and infecting a host device. And depending upon the scope of your network infrastructure, then other devices might be infected as well. And this is where one of the areas of a segmented network comes into play, is to minimize that attack area. So a lot of information real quick. I welcome your questions, not only today within our time, but you'll see contact information for me as well. And I welcome those questions at any time. And also for those might want to consider SBE membership, there's contact information for the national office of the SBE located in Indianapolis. So Larry, thank you for the opportunity this morning.
All right, thank you, Wayne. I do have my filter here in case my Marwell bites doesn't catch the COVID virus. I have my filter here, so I guess that's just like having a good filtering system in your IP. All right, thank you very much, Wayne, and contact him if you have any other questions. All right, let's continue right along now with our program. Most of you have heard of the Alternative Broadcast Inspection Program. That has been around for a good while, and each state normally has one or more inspectors that are actually employed on a contract basis by the state association, and they go around and do the alternative inspection program inspections at the individual stations. I have one of the inspectors, good friend of mine, John George, who's with RF Specialties, but he also does inspections in South Carolina and in Georgia, and he's been doing it a long time. And I asked John if he would come on and be a part of the program. And John, just talk a little bit about the program and the advantages of the program and how to get started in it.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to be participating with you, Larry, and the group that we have here. The ABIP program, or ABIP as we've called it over the years, has been in existence, believe it or not, since the late 90s. It was actually started in the Kansas City office and spread from there. They also developed the self-inspection forms. And the program is set up so that should you pass your inspection, or when you pass your inspection, you will be granted a 3-year pass from the FCC from any inspections, with the exception of those inspections that deal with issues that come from Washington, D.C. In other words, maybe you've had a complaint filed against you, or you have an interference issue of some type, or some extreme safety issue that could affect the general public. Larry and I and a number of other inspectors scattered all over the country perform these inspections on an ongoing basis, though we've all kind of been laying low because of the COVID virus and trying to do as much work as we can from home just because of the safety aspect of it. The FCC has actually still been active. They are doing inspections that deal with public safety. So if there's a complaint filed against you, as recently a station had to deal with that involved a public service two-way system, they will show up on your doorstep. So you have to be prepared for those type things. The program's really a great program. We go out, we look at all facets of the facility, everything from the online public inspection file to visiting the sites. We review station logs, which deal primarily with EAS and tower lightings. And then, of course, we go to the site and look at all the operating parameters and do a general walkthrough of the facility. We look at your licenses. We look at a lot of facets that you may not think about, some safety issues, maybe suggestions of how you could do your forms, how your plant should be maintained. We're there to help you. We're not out to fail you if you don't pass an inspection. We want to do everything that we can to help you pass that inspection and get your certificate. So the program is quite beneficial to the states and to the broadcaster. And of course, every state does their program slightly differently, but the fundamental basics are all there. And we're here to provide a helping hand, whether you're going through the inspection or just, have a day-to-day question. And Larry's been doing this for Alabama, and I've been primarily focused on Georgia and South Carolina. And we think it's a great program, and every station should participate. Larry?
Yeah, one of the things that I tell the station.
Probably, I'm going to go out to the FM site.
Oh, okay. No one's leaving us, going to the FM.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, what we were talking about was quite often when we go to stations, we remind people that we actually do. We're not the FCC, so we're not there to issue any fines. We're there to help you find things that are not that doesn't fall within the guidelines, the rules and regulations. So we want to make sure that everything is you're following it as it should be. So we don't have a little receipt book that says thank you for your volunteer contribution to the U.S. Treasury. So if we find something, we just write up a report and give you a length of time to actually correct that, and then a certificate is issued, and that's primarily how it works. John and I both have taken the checklist from the FCC and sort of augmented it with things that we see the commission listing as far as fines or violations, and we've added that to our checklist. And there's quite a few of those, and we've added that to our checklist so that we could be, when we come into your station, we make sure that we do cover everything that the commission might be able to look at. One thing, and in particular, and John, you might want to comment on this as well, is with television. We probably got a lot of television folks on the call as well. With the children's programs, there's been a lot of changes over the last year in those reports, and they've changed things around about how it works with the commercial, the certification of commercials that you run during children's programming. And John, I think you looked into some of that a little bit. So that is a little problem that TV stations need to be aware of.
Yeah, of course, July the 10th was a busy day for all broadcasters on the television side, especially because they have had, thanks to COVID, some delays in filing of reports. But the children's reports are now an annual report that's filed at the end of the calendar year. And that's the Form 398 or whatever form that they will end up utilizing as we go forward. There is some discussion that there will be some changes on that. And then there is also a certification of commercial limits that is signed by a management team member or the person who's responsible for verifying the commercial limits that everything met the FCC rules and regulations within the children's programming. That's also a form that has to be put on your online public file. So you want to be sure that that has been done. And you need to keep the backup information that comes along with that, the documents, whether it's logs or a logger or whatever type information. You have to be able to prove to the commission, if you're in a potential situation with them, that you met all the requirements. They will not just accept that document. You have to be able to prove that. So It's kind of one of those little gotchas like Larry and I were talking about the other day. You don't have to have a modulation monitor, but you have to keep within the FCC requirements on modulation. So you have to be very careful with that. The other thing that we both stumbled on quite by accident was, especially coming up with license renewal terms right now, the TV stations, we were looking at children's reports, and it seems that any children's report prior to the calendar year 2016 have vanished from the online public file. You can go on the online public file and look prior to 2016, and you will find that the information for when the load was and filing dates is still there, but if you click on the folder, there is no documentation in the folder. I did get an answer overnight last night from one of the folks at the Mass Media Bureau that they are aware of that issue, but those documents are available in the LMS. This is the new database that the Commission has recently started, that you're filing your FCC applications in now, I think all of them except for AM, and you'll be filing your license renewal in. So if you have access to the LMS, you can certainly look at them. And if you are looking from the outside in, of course, the general public can also look at the LMS files as well, too. So that's something to keep in mind. If you find your folder empty, which more than likely you will on some of those documents, check the LMS and you should be able to find it there. Larry?
Yeah, the other thing that we have discovered talking to stations when we go around, a lot of stations are not really up to date on what the chief operator requirements are, that and what the chief operator is supposed to do. Every station has to have a designated chief operator. Now that most often is the engineer at the station. It doesn't have to be the engineer. It can be the operations manager or whoever, but their responsibility is to review the documentation, station documentation on the station log, to make sure that the station is operating in accordance with all the rules and regulations. One of the things that people slip up on, if you have an AM station and you operate either in the directional mode or over 10,000 watts, that chief operator has to be a full-time employee, an employee of the station. If it's under 10,000 watts power for AM or a non-directional, then they can operate on a contract basis. All television stations, the chief operator there has to be an employee of the TV station. So that's actually how that works. And the other thing is that you have to have a document made up, and typically the general manager will do this. They'll write up a document, and there's no particular form. You just write up a document to say the chief operator of WXXX is so-and-so, and then the alternate, you must have an alternate chief operator, and they have to be listed on that same document. The reason for the alternate, according to the rules, if the chief operator is out sick or on vacation or something like that, then you have to have somebody else. And the main duty of that chief operator is to review the station log once each week. And the three things that go on that station log is all EAS activity. You have to make sure that you're receiving the weekly test from all your required sources. This means your 2 required monitor sources as well as IPAWS, that you're transmitting your own weekly test, and that you're receiving and retransmitting the monthly test. So he's to review that log and to make sure that it is correct. You also have to make a notation if you have tower lights on your tower, that he's supposed to review that you haven't had any malfunctions of any tower lights during that previous week. The third thing is something that people sort of forget about, and that is in any measurements or any adjustments or any out of tolerance that you have related to your transmission system also has to be placed on that station log. So basically what the chief operator is doing is looking at that log and seeing if all that documentation is there. And if he is not the engineer, he or she is not actually the technical person, then they can refer that to the engineering department and say, look, we haven't been receiving a weekly test from this particular station in a week or a couple of weeks, so we need to check that out, or whatever it happens to be, or the tower lights have malfunctioned. So that is the purpose of the chief operator and the station log. And we run into that. What I run into, and I don't know, and you can comment on this, John, is they forget that the chief operator is supposed to review that log once a week. They say, well, yeah, I know the VAS is working or tower lights are working. They just don't keep the documentation. The rules state that you are supposed to do that station log and keep it with the station license. Now that the station license is actually online and it's no longer required to post the station license at your facility, then people say, well, where do I keep that station log? Well, you can add the station log and the certificate of the chief operator. If you look on the online site, you'll actually see where the license is listed. There's a little block there that says other documents. That's a neat little place. The commission did a good job in making that other document folder. You can put anything you want in there to keep up with. So that's where you would put it up. And I'm sure you've run into that as well, John.
I have, and one thing I like to keep notebooks. I mean, even though you don't have to have your licenses available, I like a notebook that not only is at the studio site, this is old school, but also at the transmitter site, that has your licenses and any pertinent Form 302 information in it. Because let's say, how many times have you gotten a call from a broadcast facility and they ask you to come out and help them? Their engineer's out of town and they're off the air. Maybe the transmitter's not at full power. That license book with pertinent information about the day-to-day operations, such as information on the remote control and what all the TPOs and ERPs are, can be very handy for you. And then I'd have another notebook called the station log that would have the EAS reports and tower light information in it, and that could be located at the studio side. One thing with that too as well is, you mentioned, Larry, if you don't receive an EAS test, it is the chief operator's responsibility as someone on the staff to check with the station that you normally receive that test from, say the required weekly test or the required monthly, and find out from them. I would do this by email and in writing, so you have some documentation if there was a problem receiving it. Because you could have a receiver problem and not realize it, or they could have maybe had a problem and somebody didn't send it. But the commission is very specific about the documentation on that. So you need to be sure you have some either handwritten note or an email along with it that goes with that weekly information to cover yourself. The other thing I'll mention is maintenance logs. That's always a big point of confusion for the engineers and the operators. And there should be some form of maintenance log at the transmitter site or available at the transmitter site that just shows when you go to the site, what duties you perform. Did you check the remote control and calibrated? Are all transmitters and equipment operating properly? And you sign off on it. It's a very simple, basic log, just information showing that you are properly maintaining the equipment there at the site. And of course, you don't want to forget your quarterly tower lighting functions. Even though you may have automated controls for your particular tower and you own it, you still are required to check it once a quarter to ensure that all that equipment is properly working. And that means basically forcing a failure. Most lighting systems have a test switch on it, but forcing a failure and just being sure that the system will alarm and will actually contact you or whoever you have designated that the tower lights are not working properly. Larry?
Yeah, and talking about that with the the maintenance log, there is actually a rule, and I don't remember the actual number of the rule, but it indicates that every station is supposed to have a schedule of maintenance. And that has always amused me, because how do you schedule maintenance? That's sort of a funny thing. And so I asked the commission one day about that, and they said, well, if the way that you comply with that actual rule is with a maintenance log. If we come and visit your station and we see that you've been visiting the station on a regular basis, and John and I both recommend people visit their transmitter site at least once a week if they can, and you make notes in that maintenance log of what you did or what you observed, and the FCC inspector told me that if he sees that, he sees that you've been doing there, then that would mean that you were going. Now, if he doesn't see anything that where you've been coming out and checking things at the transmitter, then he will question you about, about your visit schedule and going out to the transmitter. Another item that you mentioned, John, was the license, having the license available at the transmitter. You would probably be surprised that the number of stations that I go to and talk to the engineer and find out that they have never even looked at their license. They know it's in the folder, they know it's on the now online, but they never sat down and actually looked at it and read what's in the license. And this is one of those got you. If you don't look at that license and you don't have an idea, first of all, to make sure everything on there is correct. And one thing that you'll find out, and I know, John, you've run into this before, I've been to FM stations where you look on the license, I'll look on the license, and there will not be any TPO, transmitter power output. Now, I don't have a clue of how that gets through the commission, why a license is issued and it doesn't have any TPO. But just a little story, I went to a station one time and it was not on the license, and I asked the engineer, I said, what is your TPO supposed to be? He said 17,000 watts. So I said, okay, how do you know it's supposed to be 17,000 watts? It's not on the license. And he scratched his head a minute and he said, oh, the guy that I took his place said that's the way it's always run. Which
Yeah,
is not.
It's a problem, and that's why I mentioned it's nice to have the Form 302 or some documentation in that license book out at the transmitter site, because you need to have that information, because the commission expects you to have it, along with, it's always good to have your transmitter labeled with the proper TPO and the operating efficiency of the transmitter, because that's still a requirement to be known. I'll mention one other thing, Larry, about licenses that you and I both ran into, and I didn't want to forget it since we got about 7 or 8 minutes left. But license renewal is obviously in process. It's made it through a good part of the country for radio, and it's starting up now for television. But when your renewal is granted, in the past, you got a postcard in the mail, and you could look on your license information in the CBDS, and your FCC renewal license would be there. Well, now they are not sending out any postcards. And if you looked in your application on the online public file, it will say approved or granted, and there's no license. What you have to do, here we go again, back to the LMS, you need to look for the license renewal document in your LMS folder, and then you have to download it and then manually upload it into the online public file. The commission, for some reason, is not transferring that information over to the online public file. They actually have a note that it's your responsibility to do that. And then, as both of us have already found out, you can't upload a renewal license to the renewal license folder. You have to put it in other documents, other renewal documents. So it's a little gotcha and a little problem. It's just one of the things we're all dealing with as they make this transition to LMS from CBDS.
Right. Do you have your chat up, John? There's a question posted there that you might want to talk about.
Okay, Larry, if you, let's see, located in the same building with your transmitter and your station is hubbed out to a master control. And I check the settings often on the transmitter, but what are the rules documenting the transmitter readings? Do I still need to do this? As long as you keep a maintenance log and somebody's monitoring, that's fine. Now, transmitter readings is one of those gray areas. The commission has not required transmitter readings to be logged for a number of years. But you need to be able to monitor it and prove to the commission that if there is an out of tolerance condition, the chief operator or lead engineer will be notified. So it's kind of one of those gotchas. As long as your remote control is set up so that somebody is notified if there's an out of tolerance condition, then the commission would accept that and it would probably be okay. But that still does not keep you from doing weekly maintenance checks and EAS checks and those type of things. So you're still responsible for the maintenance side of it and the logging of those maintenance issues.
Another issue that we seem to come up with is on AMs, and particularly ones that either reduce power at night or they go to a directional pattern. The commission actually requires you to have a way to make sure that that changing in mode has actually occurred. And there are a number of ways to do that. I had one station tell me, I said, how do you know that your station has changed to nighttime pattern or nighttime pattern power? He said, well, I have it set up so when my tower lights come on, I get a text. And he said, and when the tower lights come on, it's the same time we switch our mode. John, I don't think that would be quite legal.
No, especially when a bad storm rolls into the area and the tower lights come on. Does that mean you switched your mode at 3 o'clock in the afternoon? And that's an issue that there is a gray area on. A lot of stations, if they're using some of the more sophisticated remote control systems, like a Burke, for example, it will do all that automatic logging so you would have it. But there are a lot of stations that use very simplistic systems, maybe as simple as a sign system. And what the engineer has done is with pattern change or sign off, any kind of switching, he's notified immediately by a call out from the remote control. So that way he knows it's properly switched and he's in the right mode, and that would be acceptable to the commission, because if they did come on site, they're going to want you to simulate a pattern switch and probably sit there and wait for your phone to ring. So it is something you need to have set up in your call outs or your text notifications or your email notifications so that you can prove if you did have an inspection that the system is functioning properly.
AM seems to get the brunt of all the problems, and of course one that everybody knows about is fencing. You are required to fence an AM tower because the tower is hot with RF, and I don't know how many I've gone to where the part of the fences fell down or the gates are rusty. You can't, it's fell off the hinges and stuff that way. So John, that's another area for AMs that people need to watch out, is the fencing of that tower.
And that is correct. And that doesn't mean a little small fence that's about 5 feet high. You need to have the fence so that no one can easily climb across the fence. And you want it so that children or animals cannot get under the fence as well either. I have seen cases recently where they couldn't even get in the fence because they didn't have a key to the lock, or the lock was rusted and you couldn't open it up, or they would do something like just take the hinges off and go in, and that's not acceptable with the commission. That's a safety issue, and they're very stringent on those things. And of course, you and I both know a number of people who have spent $3,000 to $5,000 to buy a $5 master lock that could keep the gate locked. So you don't want to get in those situations, because the commission does look at fencing. Safety issues are the one thing they really go after. Anything dealing with tower lighting and monitoring, fencing, especially around AM sites, pattern switching, anything that deals with safety or interference issues are big finable issues these days.
Right. One final question. We're about to run out of time here, but a question on the chat room says, is there a requirement that the transmitter logs are placed in the online public file, or is that just a suggestion?
No. And what we were talking about is station log. There's a difference between station log and transmitter logs. Transmitter logs are going to have your transmitter readings on it. And I would not recommend putting those as part of your station log, which would be your tower lights, abnormal operations, and EAS. You can certainly put those on the FCC's website. But like I say, I personally like a notebook, or people keep file cabinets with all the documents in it and readily available. That way you could show it when the commission shows up. But you do not want your transmitter logs at the same file as your station log, because technically, if the commission saw your transmitter logs and they saw that you were operating, say, for a couple hours at 110% instead of 105% or less, that could be a finable situation for you. And maybe it was just written down in error, or maybe the remote control got out of calibration. So if you get an inspection, you only show the information that the inspector is requesting.
That's correct. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody, especially Wayne Pasita from Texas A&M and the president of the SBE. And John, I appreciate you being with us today. If you have any questions, you can contact either one of those directly, and I'm sure they can help you out. So thank you, everybody, for attending. Our next meeting will be on Tuesday, August 18th at 10 a.m. Central Time. So we invite you to, you can log in. I think the login number or the registry URL is the same, and you just click on the date that you want to attend the program. So thank you, everybody, for attending today.
Thank you, Larry.